Adobe is a company that was made successful by photographers. And if it wasn't enough that Adobe is already throwing photographers under the bus with all this AI stuff and basically making everything about AI to the point where they had recent ads that were saying, skip the photographer. But Adobe isn't stopping there. In this recent terms of service skerfuffle that they've actually recently, as of yesterday, are backpedaling on, trying to deal with the dumpster fire and the reality that all the photography and arts world has realized that Adobe has gone full predator and predatory on their work and using the excuse of we're protecting children. Adobe tools, we've gotten used to them. They work well, but I switch back and forth all the time because I'm using these different apps and experimenting and testing and making videos. I just want to say one thing. We don't have to feel locked in. There are options. In fact, stick around to the end of the video because we're going to talk about realistically what our options are, and I want to hear from you guys in the comments as well. But I think there's something that Adobe really needs to understand. We need to resonate, not just with Adobe, with all these predatory companies that are trying to use terms of service and software updates and stuff to oftentimes even break devices that we pay for. This is stuff that's happening. And I'm not encouraging that we do anything illegal here. But if Adobe stealing your art is not wrong, then neither is pirating their software. And I'll say that out loud. If our rights to content, to intellectual property don't apply, if they can do whatever they want, then why can't we? Maybe if you want to be respected, Adobe, you should respect. One thing I've learned is that when a government or a corporation is telling you that whatever they're doing that you don't like is to protect you, you can rest 100% sure that the opposite is true. This has actually been their defense of, hey, this isn't new. This has existed for a long time. It's to the point where even major consumer rights YouTubers that pull no punches whatsoever, like Louis Rasmussen, are coming out and just saying it what it is. And frankly, as a photographer, but not just as a photographer, as a consumer, I am sick of this mindset of we can violate you. You pay for something and we can change it later. Remember signing up for Netflix and they encouraged us to share passwords because we were paying for screens, right? If you paid for 4 screens, you should be able to use 4 screens. Now they're cutting everybody off. And even when you have 2 homes, you go to your other home and it says, oh, you can't watch Netflix because this isn't your home. This is someone else's home. So what we have is this constant barrage of companies that are saying, now we have power, now we have control, now there's a lack of competition, we can screw it to our customers. Over the past few weeks, and I'm sure you've seen some of the videos and discussion, rightfully, photographers and artists have been absolutely outraged at these terms of service. These terms of use have come in and basically said, hey, we, Adobe, are going to sort through your stuff. We're going to review your content. We're going to listen to your audio. We're going to spy on you. Adobe is saying we're the creepy landlord, and to keep you safe and to keep children safe, we're going to look in your bedroom window at 1 o'clock in the morning just to make sure nothing bad's going on. That's who Adobe is now. Now, I've been saying since back in the Pro Photography Podcast 1.0 days, this is like the first days of Adobe Cloud, I was against it from the beginning. Don't get me wrong, Adobe has some great products, and if you guys follow this channel, you know that I make a lot of tools that work in Adobe products. Although I don't limit myself to only Adobe products. We need more competition. We'll come back to that in a minute because we have battles like the Lightroom and Capture One battle. So next thing you know, people get mad and Adobe comes in and they're like, oh, we're going to clarify this. And their clarification actually made people more angry. Basically, their clarification said, no, this was already in our terms of service that you have to agree to access the files now. That's the important point here as well. You're paying for this software. Your files are on their cloud. And a window pops up. Oh, you have to agree to this or you can no longer use your content. What are you agreeing to? Well, you're agreeing to their updated version that we may access or listen to your content in limited ways as permitted by law, etc., etc., etc. And then you go down and there's all these things. Eventually they get to the point. Here's where it is. It always comes down to this, right, with the politicians and the corporations. We may use available technologies, vendors, third parties, read, or processes, including manual review, to screen for certain types of illegal content. For example, child sexual abuse material or other abusive content or behavior. Let me be clear. This virtue signaling, this idea that it's their job, it's the job of the cloud to review your content, that we don't have the presumption of innocence, that due process no longer matters. It's important to understand that this doesn't just stop at Adobe. You may have seen the news a few months ago where Amazon locked down a man's smart house that was run by all these smart devices and closed his account so his home could not function as he built it, because they control all this with terms of service, with EULAs. And they decided, because of something that happened on his Ring doorbell, that he was a racist. And so they shut down his account and his access to his home. You have to understand the level that these companies are willing to go to, saying that they're protecting us, but really it's all about control. Adobe comes in and they say, hey, we're going to screen and review your content, right? To make sure that you're not doing anything wrong. Adobe, you have no right to review anyone's content, regardless of whether you think it's wrong. That's not what you're paid for. You are a software service. Now, this really does go back to the fact that we've let ourselves fall into this trap. Remember when we used to buy software and then we used it as long as we wanted to, as long as it was still compatible with our computer. And when the time came and when we were ready, we bought it again. There was none of this trash going on where you can just be shut down at any time. You no longer have access to your life's work. You no longer have access to your job. So rightfully, Adobe is getting destroyed, not just by consumer rights advocates, but by normal artists and photographers who are saying, hell no, you do not review my content. You don't get to use my content. You don't get to use it for AI. Now they're coming out and saying, no, we're not using this for AI model training. Does anyone believe them? I don't think so, because they've proven that they are the creepy, pervy landlord peeking in your window at 11 o'clock at night. So now they come out yesterday and they're still backpedaling, right? They're still saying, hey, you own your content. We're not going to train generative AI on this, right? And they go through this and then they say, Adobe doesn't scan content stored locally on your computer, right? Only content hosted to the cloud. Now, I've said for a long time, when you subscribe to Adobe, you can get Photoshop and Lightroom for like $10 a month. It's cheaper than Capture One. It's cheaper than, well, pretty much everything. And it doesn't come with a bunch of cloud storage. And I've said, don't bother. Don't use Adobe's cloud storage. I think it comes with like 100 gigs. And so if I want to edit a photo on my phone on Lightroom Mobile, or have a few favorites that sync from Lightroom Mobile to my main Lightroom, I can do that. And I've talked about that on videos on this channel. But I do not put my image collections on Adobe Cloud. There was another pretty good video that Tony Northrup did on this that address the issue, not just of our personal privacy, but the fact that sometimes people have NDAs. Sometimes we're working on private photo sessions for a client, let's say a boudoir session or something like that. And Adobe has no right. Imagine Adobe having the audacity to come out and saying, hey, we're going to review your stuff to make sure children aren't being hurt. We're gonna check out your private projects, okay? Just to make sure no policies are being violated. This is Adobe right now. They are the predator. They are promoting the predatory behavior while they try to imply that they're doing their job to stop predatory behavior, which is in no way their job. They're not the police. They don't get to decide probable cause. And we have to stop with this mindset that corporations and companies who have no obligation to follow any sort of due process, right? Governments and the courts abuse us bad enough in today's justice system. We can't let corporations become the justice system where we have things that are essential to our life, our jobs, etc., and they get to decide whether we're in and out based on whether we score high enough socially within the corporation. That's not the job of Adobe. And any of the self-righteous virtue signalers that are saying, oh, well, you're promoting bad things. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that we have rights, we have privacy, and we're paying for a service. We're not paying to be policed, Adobe. We don't give a rat's ass whether you think you need to review content behind the scenes. The answer is no. Remember the stories when the TSA had these body scanners and people were sharing lewd photos? The employees of the TSA were sharing lewd photos behind the scenes and making jokes about people's bodies and their shape and things like that. This happened, guys. Do you trust Adobe? Do you think they're really not training AI models if they're going through your stuff? But this actually was a question of mine. And the good news is that our local content, that means like when you're using Photoshop, you're using Lightroom, you're storing these things on your hard disk, they don't appear to have a way to review what you're doing on that doesn't go to the cloud. Now, as soon as you're using generative AI and all that kind of stuff that honestly photographers really don't need at all this fakery isn't making our photos better. It's making them more soulless and lifeless. I've talked about a lot of this stuff on the recent videos as I've been doing pictorialism and showing you guys how to do pictorialism and making tools to kind of bring more ambience and more atmosphere and more glow to our photos. Check out some of the recent videos I've made if you haven't seen that, because photos should have feeling. They shouldn't be faked. They shouldn't be sterile. They should be emotional and soulful. This affects me, right? A lot of my work, I do a lot of workshops. I make tools for Lightroom, for Photoshop. I make actions. I make presets. I also make Capture One styles. In fact, one thing, let's talk about alternatives. A lot of people were pissed at Capture One last year because they essentially switched to an all subscription model and kind of screwed over their loyal customers on that as well. But at least it doesn't appear like they're peeking in the back door to look at our content and our photos. I do want to say that any of you that use my current presets, if you use Lightroom, the Capture One versions are included in all of my presets. And you don't have to buy it again. You can go log into your account and download it. This is just something that I've been doing for years because of this, because I've known we need more competition. That's why I started supporting Capture One, even though it has less of a user base. So any of you that use my film as presets, my silver, my natural HDR, the Capture One styles are there waiting for you if you decide to go that route. Now, what about Photoshop? Well, I still have a lot of users, and this is something that, again, with my Photoshop actions, I do a legacy version on all of my tools, right? So I have a lot of users that are still using Photoshop 6 that use even my latest actions, my pictorialist actions. They work in Photoshop 6. And a lot of times it takes quite a bit extra work behind the scenes to do this. Sometimes there's little features missing, but the truth is Photoshop hasn't changed that much in the past 10 years. There's just new cool little features here and there. But most of the time when I'm building these advanced effects and scripts and tools to do really cool edits after the raw file edits in Photoshop, I can do the same thing in CS6. So all of the actions I make work in CS6. And this is an option. You can go out and you can get a copy. You may already have a copy of CS6 and you can dump your cloud subscriptions. Now, on the other hand, a lot of us need the latest tools. A lot of us need the latest Lightroom, the latest Photoshop for whatever we're doing. InDesign, Premiere. I switched from Premiere to DaVinci Resolve for video years ago. Haven't regretted it. I use these tools every day because I'm not only using them in my photography, but I'm developing, I'm making products for you guys, and I have to have access to these latest tools. But on the other hand, we don't have to let this slide. Adobe can't get away with this. Now, what about Lightroom? Well, you can use Lightroom 6. I get this question all the time. And again, you may have noticed if you use any of my presets, they always include a legacy pack. These are the old .lr preset format. All of my preset packs come with the legacy format that work in Lightroom 6. And all those processing tools and those film looks and things like that work. Now, can you get the same AI selection tools and speed masking? No, there's some things in Lightroom 6 that exist in the latest versions of Lightroom that are actually very good in the latest versions of Lightroom that you're not going to be able to use in Lightroom 6. But it is an option. And of course, the other option is to switch completely away from Adobe tools to things like Capture One, like we talked about. You can use Affinity. The problem is we really don't have good competition. Between Affinity and Photoshop, if I said, no, I'm not going to do cloud, I would probably just go back to Photoshop CS6 because Affinity is lacking so much in terms of it's a good app. It's a good app and you can do a lot in it. You can do those pixel-based layer edits, but it's lacking a lot in terms of serious professional workflow. That's why you're going to a layer editor. Because if you're not doing advanced edits, you can stay in Lightroom, you can stay in Capture One, you can stay in your raw processor, you can stay in DxO, whatever it is that you want to use, right? A layer edit is about doing atmospheric. It's about doing advanced retouching. For me as a professional who's been doing this for 20 plus years, if I go to Photoshop, I'm absolutely using actions. I'm doing advanced edits that would normally take me an hour and it pumps those into seconds because they're all scripted in action. And Photoshop is very well designed for that. Affinity is not. Yes, there's some scripting and action tools, but they're so far behind Photoshop in terms of being able to run scripts within scripts and do color coding and advanced things with them. And frankly, people ask me, hey, Gavin, can you make your actions that you do in Photoshop in Affinity? And the answer, up to this point at least, has pretty much been no. Affinity doesn't have the advanced enough abilities, particularly in its workflow tools, to do this. And I hope Affinity uses this opportunity to improve, because we need competition in the pixel level editing space. So Adobe's clarifications, Adobe trying to backpedal but not actually really commit to anything, what they're really doing is playing games with us, and it shouldn't be accepted. Adobe should remove all of these things from their terms of service. They should clarify that they absolutely will not review anything because it belongs to us, and they're not a creepy neighbor landlord that can peek in our window in the middle of the night, and they should respect their customers. So what do you think is another alternative? There's a lot of other apps out there. Luminar Neo, for example, is often held up as a comparison, but Luminar Neo's processing engine, in terms of how it handles highlights and things like that, is not even close to that of Capture One, to that of Lightroom. Doesn't mean it's a bad app. Doesn't mean that for some of you it may be not be a good alternative. Capture One, another good alternative. Old versions of Lightroom and Photoshop, another good alternative. So we do have alternatives from the perspective of those of you that are my customers. I'm supporting those alternatives as much as possible to make sure that we're not completely logged in to the Adobe Cloud ecosystem. Because I said from day one, if you go back to 2007, 2008, when they were introducing this stuff, I said, Adobe's going to use this to abuse us. This cloud stuff, the subscription stuff. And even though the subscription Adobe is actually a good value, they're doing exactly what we thought they would do. They've become powerful. They've become super wealthy from this, and they don't really care what their customers think. It's time for them to start caring. And it's us that has to make them feel that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments about this Adobe dumpster fire. Let's see where it goes. Let's keep the pressure on. And we'll see you next time.